All right, so good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Approaching the College Interview webinar. My name is Jennifer Robinson. I'm a senior admissions counselor at Providence College. I'm also a very proud alumni, graduated back in 2013. And I've been working at Providence College for 5 years now, so I've done a fair share of college interviews with prospective students. So I'm excited that you're here tonight so I can, share my different experiences and kind of the do's and don'ts. I'll let my colleague Elizabeth introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jen, for that introduction. My name is Elizabeth Ward. I am an admission counselor here at Providence College, and I'm very excited to kind of go through these do's and don'ts with you all tonight. I am also a very proud alumna of Providence. I graduated in 2015 and have also done my fair share of interviews going into my 4th year in the office, but having also held a number of different roles and kind of buzzwords that we'll use as we go through tonight's presentation, having been a senior admission fellow, having been a graduate assistant, and now a full-time counselor. So hopefully here to answer all of your questions about this college interview process.
Yeah, so tonight we'll be going over kind of, am I bragging too much about myself? How many questions should I be bringing to the interview? And kind of what should I be doing before, during, and after the interview? So to get started, we will start with before the interview, what you should be doing. I think just that one slide.
Sorry.
No worries. So before the interview, what's important to do is once you have your list of schools that you're interested in, is find on their website, where can I schedule an interview? And you are all taking the step to come to this webinar during the summer, and you're all logged in and hearing this now. And I would say don't wait another minute to go ahead and look at that interview schedule. Some schools might not start their interviews until the fall or until the school year has started. But here at Providence College, we started hosting interviews just a few weeks ago. So we start in the summer, and we always find that there's some empty slots in the summer. And then by October, we have students emailing us saying, all the interview slots are full, but I really want to interview with you. What do I do? Can you fit me in? And unfortunately, oftentimes our answer is no, because we only have so much availability for interviews. So definitely take the step now in the summer to see what the schedule is like. There's no need, at least at Providence College, to wait until your senior year has begun. You can schedule one of those in the summer. For us at Providence, interviews are solely reserved for students going into their senior year or students once they are in their senior year. So if you're a junior tuning in, again, I'm glad that you're here, and this is great information to know going into the future, but just know that our interviews are reserved for students who are in their senior year. Once you have that interview scheduled, I would say certainly take your time to do the research on the institution that you are going to do an interview with. We are by no means expecting you to know everything about the school, and that's what the purpose of the interview can be, as well as for you to get to know more about the school. But you definitely want to know some background information about the school. So for example, Providence College is a Catholic institution, and that's a really big part of our identity. So when a student comes into an interview and they don't know that, they don't realize it, because it's a really big shock to us, that kind of shows us that the student hasn't done a ton of research, and it makes us question, why is that student applying to Providence College? Is Providence College really going to be the best fit for him or her? Also, we find it really impressive when students are able to pick out things in particular that are unique about Providence College and that they foresee being something that would be a part of their experience. So maybe there's a specific academic program that you see on our website or in one of our brochures that you're really wanting to learn more about that. bringing that up in the interview can show us that you've done your research and you're interested to learn more. And then finally, I would say, take the time to practice what you want to say out loud in some capacity. So whether that's with your high school counselor, with your brother, your sister, your friend, or even in the mirror or on the car drive, to a certain college or something like that. You might think you know exactly how you're going to answer something in your head, and you've gone through your answers in your head, and then you get into that interview situation and it comes out completely differently. By practicing what you might want to say, that can help to avoid really rambling, which we definitely see sometimes, right, Liz? And going on and on and on and not actually answering the question that was asked. So practicing can help with that. At the same time, we don't want you to come into an interview and sound like a robot. So, you don't have to overdo it. You don't have to have a script. You don't have to have anything to read off of, but just practice some of the answers to general questions that we'll talk about you might expect to see in an interview. Anything to add to that at all, Liz?
No, I think that's perfect. And I especially love hearing the, don't memorize your responses to everything, but just going through and practicing once can really help you just sound very polished and sure of yourself.
So then you'll get to the day of your interview. Right now, during these times, you're going to find that institutions are doing a mix of different types of interviews. At Providence College, we are doing virtual interviews. Even in a virtual setting, it's important to represent your best self and really look presentable. So while we'll only kind of be able to see from the waist up, be mindful of what you're wearing for your interview. Really, we would suggest just no sweatshirts or hoodies, no low-cut shirts. But another thing to be mindful of in the virtual setting as well is thinking about where you're going to do that interview. So what does your background look like? Is your dog barking in the background? Can you have your dog in another room? Can you tell your little sister, not to barge in within the next hour or so? So definitely think about the space that you're doing it, what the background and noise looks like. Maybe your bedroom is the only space that you have to yourself in your house. If that's the case and your bed is in the background, make sure you make your bed. So just thinking about those things ahead of time can really help you to present your best self. Also, in the past, when students were coming to campus for in-person interviews, we would always say, arrive around 10 minutes early. So kind of budget that time so that you can find parking, you can find the admissions office, and you have time to check in. Arriving late really would not present your best self again. Same thing goes for our virtual interviews. Technology can be tricky. You never know if your video or your audio is going to work on the first shot, or if there's going to be a few different steps you're going to have to take. So definitely log in a little bit early so you can become familiar with the technology and so that you don't keep your interviewer waiting for you. Again, when it comes to the virtual interviews, our best suggestion is, if possible, if you have access to a laptop or a computer that has a camera, we suggest using that over using a smartphone. I did do an interview, one of my first virtual interviews, with a student, and because he was using his smartphone, I could really only see a small portion of the top of his head, which made it a little difficult for us to converse well, and we were able to have a discussion still. But if you have access to a laptop or a computer, that usually helps to present your best self. And then finally, for those institutions that are hosting in-person interviews still, just be mindful, do your research beforehand. What are the requests that they are making, given the environment that we're in right now? So do they want you to check in a certain place? Do they want you to wear a mask during certain times? Just a lot of colleges, all colleges will share that information with you. And to present your best self, you want to comply with everything that they're asking. And then finally, the day of your interview will be here. And as you get started, one of the first suggestions that we have, in addition to, finding a good space where there's good lighting and no background noise, also you're going to want to keep the distractions out of the situation. So in a virtual world, don't have your cell phone right next to you and be distracted by any text messages or phone calls. I would recommend closing out of all the tabs that you have on your computer as well. You don't want any messages or emails popping up that can kind of catch your eye, even if it's accidental. You're going to look there anyways. So definitely, get those out of the space. If you're going to an in-person interview, don't bring your cell phone into the interview room. Leave it with your parents, leave it in the car. Again, the last thing you want to do is look distracted when you're trying to show an institution that you're going to be a good fit for them. And just know that all institutions do it a little bit differently. So if you're not sure, like, who is going to interview me in this process, for us at Providence, it could be an admissions counselor. So it could be Liz or myself, or any of the other 15 members of our team. It could be our graduate assistant in the office. We do have some senior fellows who conduct interviews. So those are current students who have been trained by the admissions staff. And then at other institutions, you will see alumni who conduct interviews as well. Know that no matter who interviews you, he or she will do a write-up of the conversation that was had, and they will add it to your file so that our entire admissions office can see that conversation. So if you log on and you do an interview with one of our senior admissions fellows, know that you're going to have a great conversation and that your admissions counselor will see that. You do not need to do a second interview again with your assigned admissions counselor. So no matter who it's with, our whole team's going to get to see that conversation. And finally, definitely start off strong in the interview. Be sure to introduce yourself and again, keep eye contact. I think by closing out of different tabs and getting distractions out of the room, it will be easier to keep eye contact during the interview. If this was a year ago, we would recommend starting off with a strong handshake. Right now, we will not recommend that, but take time to introduce yourself and keep your eyes on the person viewing you. Did I miss anything so far, Liz?
Nope, you hit everything nail on the head. It does always make me laugh when students have an interview with a different counselor or a senior fellow in our office, and I get the immediate follow-up of, okay, that was a great conversation, can't wait to talk to you too. And it's just that reminder of those notes will be shared, but any trained member in our office will be happy to really just share information about the college, and that's the whole point anyway.
Absolutely.
So as we kind of keep going with the interview, you're at the start of it, you've avoided that handshake, but still keeping eye contact. What actually happens with the meat and heart of that interview? So typically speaking, it will kind of start with that counselor or student or graduate assistant, starting off with a few questions. We have some of our favorites that we love to ask, usually always starting off with just simply tell me about yourself. And this is where those practiced answers can really be very helpful. Knowing what you might want to say about yourself, putting that best foot forward in that response. Some of our other questions that we love to start off with, what was your favorite class throughout high school, least favorite class? How have your grades been? I think one of the biggest pieces from the academic standpoint that we really do want students to touch upon are to provide any of those explanations that may not be as obvious when reading an application. So we may ask a student if there's any places on their transcript that need that further explanation that they want to talk about. Maybe a grade in a class doesn't reflect the hard work you put into it. Other things, what year were you most proud of throughout high school? One of my favorite questions, Jen, I'm intrigued to hear what you have to say too about this, is asking what your teacher or friends would say about you. How would they describe you? I don't know about you, but there's usually some of the buzzwords that really come up with this: hardworking, friendly, kind, a good person to have in class, that kind of stuff. And just trying to think of other words or other descriptors than those traditional buzzwords that we typically hear.
Yeah, I would certainly echo that. Hardworking is one that I hear a lot. Kind to others and friendly, which I'm sure that those are true when the students are saying that, and we like to hear that. But try and think of maybe some words outside of the box, or even if you feel those truly are the very best words to describe you, help us to understand that picture a little bit more and provide an example of why you are hardworking, or where was an area where you were kind to others.
Exactly. So it's always that expanding upon piece that we're looking for. Other big questions: what types of extracurricular activities have you been involved with? And this is where really showing those leadership roles that you've taken advantage of throughout high school often get most highlighted. So we started off this presentation by saying, am I bragging too much about myself? You really can't in this kind of situation. We want to hear what you've been involved with, and you should be extremely proud of what you've accomplished throughout your high school years. And this is really that way to show us things that you're proud of. As I kind of said, expanding upon things that we don't necessarily see in your application or on your transcript, this is where we can kind of see that fit to major as well. We often like to ask, what are you interested in studying? And this is where you can really show that, you know, maybe you want to explain that biology grade of why you're really proud, and how that's influencing you to do something moving forward, or the opposite sometimes too. But this is where that interest can really come through. You're involved with the school newspaper because you really want to go into journalism moving forward, different things like that. This is where we can start to see that fit to major really come through with the application. We kind of continue through the interview. It's important to remember too that you're asking questions of your interviewer as well throughout this time, and coming in with an appropriate number of questions, starting to think through a good number to ask, probably about 3 to 5. Always remembering that if you have more, you can always follow up in an email. We'll talk through some of those good and bad questions in just a moment. But it is always good to see that the students are prepared coming into that interview. This is where you can start to ask those school-specific questions Jen had touched upon about a specific program or things like that. As I start to go through interviews too, one of my favorite questions to sort of end with is asking students, what have I not asked you that you really want me to know about you? This is me trying to understand things that you haven't explained yet that you really think are important. It's always important to remember too that these are confidential conversations. Anything that you share is kept in confidentiality within the admission team. So anything of having moved a lot during high school and how that disrupted your experience, or any of those types of extra things that you maybe don't want to write your college essay about or don't know where to explain otherwise, this is really what that interview can be most helpful with. As we start to think about though the student questions that you may ask, I think one of the most obvious bad questions that we like to come up with in this example is, do you think I'll get in? By no means would I, as a counselor or any other role, would we expect somebody to say, yes, you've answered enough of my questions correctly today, you get your acceptance letter at the end of this. It's really not an appropriate question because there are so many other factors that go into the admission review process. I think a better way to start to ask that type of question is, what can I do to help make my application stand out? What things should I be adding in there? What should I talk about? Those types of questions are more appropriate with regard to figuring out your personal fit to a campus as well. Another bad example is comparing or talking about another institution. I always like to bring up the, you wouldn't wear another college's sweatshirt on a campus tour. Same kind of concept in the interview. You wouldn't bring up another school and start to compare, well, this school offers this, do you offer that too? I don't think that's a very appropriate way of talking about something. As you start to learn about the institution though, a good question would be, for your institution, what do the different deadlines mean? Knowing that every school seems to have some variation with what early action may mean versus regular decision, those types of conversations I think are more fruitful for a student to ask during that time. This could also be your opportunity to, again, ask about protocols with regard to COVID-19. As Jennifer kind of mentioned, though, a lot of these are available on a school's website. So I don't know if it's overly important to kind of take up a lot of that interview time talking specifically about COVID-related topics. As you start to wrap up your interview, 3 most important steps to take towards the end: obviously thanking the interviewer for their time, taking time out of their day to meet with you, answer your questions, and really just help you through this admission process is always the best way to start to wrap up. For us specifically, as we've kind of talked about, your personal counselor in the office may not be the one conducting that interview. So I think it's really important to then always find out who specifically in the office may be reading your application moving forward, or as we call it, who is your territory manager, who's the person for your specific area, and get the business card or contact information for that person. And most importantly, I think my favorite piece, that follow through after the interview. When students either send that email follow-up, asking that other additional question that you maybe didn't ask in the interview, or a handwritten note, I think really goes above and beyond. And always include one piece that really came from your conversation, one piece that stood out during your conversation together. Maybe you had talked about intramurals and you found that specifically interesting, mentioning that in the thank you letter afterwards, or a specific program following up after that. I think that's always a really great way to connect the conversation that you had with the interviewer and that follow through afterwards. Jen, did I miss anything about the nuts and bolts of the actual interview?
So no, you did a great job. I think the only thing I would add to how you're mentioning, it's not really appropriate to bring up other institutions during the interview. And another reason for that is because in an interview, we are really trying to gain a sense of how or why are you a good fit for Providence College, or what are you going to bring to our community. And we want to keep it really more specific to our institution. And so as you're doing your research, as you're coming up with questions for the different institutions that you are planning to interview with, just really think, how can I get across that I really see myself at this institution? I'm going to bring something specific to their community. So that's why it's really not as appropriate to talk about or compare other institutions. But other than that, I think you did a really great job. I do want to mention to all of our participants that we do have a question and answer function here in the webinar, and I do see that we already have one question, so thanks for sending that in already. And that is, should we be sending our transcript or any other materials in before the interview? So Liz, I'll let you kind of say your opinion on that.
So I think it's a very good question to ask. I think in person, it's much easier to bring those along with you and kind of walk your interviewer through what the two of you are looking at together. That may be a little more difficult specifically for us, just because you don't learn who your interviewer is prior to that moment. In this virtual world right now, I think it's more appropriate just to start to talk through those things and then send that follow-up resume or list of activities after the interview. I don't know if it's necessarily the most important to send it beforehand.
Yeah, and something I'll also add to that is that our team is going to see that information anyways, eventually. So in the interview, something else, I would mention is that we're trying to gain is, what can we learn about you that we aren't already going to see from your transcript or from your list of activities on your Common App. So, if there's an area of your transcript where maybe you took a dip in terms of your grades and you want to explain that, that's something really, really helpful to do during the interview, because there might not be another explanation for that in your application. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have your transcript readily available during your virtual interview. That's something you can definitely take the time to explain without us having it visual, we'll take some notes and then we'll eventually see that on the application anyways.
Great point.
So the next question that we have, Liz, is it okay to bring in a notebook and pencil and take some notes during the interview? Actually, we've had a few people ask that. So another great question. Personally,
Absolutely.
I think it's great to do that. Yeah, so absolutely feel free to come and take some notes during the interview. I would suggest kind of waiting till the end when it's more so that question and answer period, when you as a prospective student are answering questions and taking out the notebook. Then I wouldn't read off of a notebook when the person who is interviewing you is asking the questions, but absolutely take that. And in that same wavelength, don't be shy to ask questions throughout the conversation. While most situations you will, have some time at the end to ask questions, if you're in the middle of a conversation talking about the marketing program at Providence College and you want to know more about internships and it's on the top of your mind, feel free to let that naturally come up in conversation. That's kind of like a tangent to the question, but both Liz and I agree it's absolutely fine to bring a notepad in and take some notes.
Absolutely. And again, kind of going off that tangent, I do think it's really great to just keep the conversation organic. So when a topic comes up that you do have a question about, go ahead and ask them at that point. From the notebook perspective, I think it's really great too then for the students to make sure that you're keeping the right information with the right school. So when you go back to kind of review different notes that you've taken on each of the schools you're looking at, you know that, yes, that marketing conversation went with Providence College specifically.
Next question, is Providence going to do in-person interviews during the school year? Just today, we heard that we will be remaining with virtual interviews for the foreseeable future. As you know, it's a very fluid time and things can be subject to change, but for now, our plan, at least for the coming months, is to remain virtual with our interviews. And then, so Liz, this is something we talked about as we were preparing.
Perfect.
Could interviews hurt you or do they only help you?
Really great question, and something that we had talked about when we were preparing for this and something we talked about again right before we got started. And I think one thing to remember is if doing an interview one-on-one with somebody is something that brings up extreme anxiety in you and that you feel would not put your best foot forward, maybe that's not the right specific campus experience for you to take part in. I know personally, any of my students that fall within my territory, they can email me at any hour of day with any questions that, or provide any explanations that they would have maybe in an interview that comes across better via email. I would rather that than have a student have such an anxiety producing experience of coming to do a personal interview. If though you think that it's the right way to explain certain things that came up during your high school experience and you're comfortable with that one-on-one conversation, go right ahead. But I do think it's important to ask schools going into it, is it required of my application to be complete to do an interview? Different things like that. Jen, what else did we kind of talk through?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. Institution by institution, it's going to differ. So some will require one, some will strongly encourage one. At Providence College, it is completely optional. So if you do not do one, it will not hurt you. But can it help you if you have a great interview? Sure. But take that with a grain of salt and don't be afraid to ask the admissions counselor at the different institutions what they would say. So for Providence College, it will not hurt you if you don't do one. At another institution, it might. So as you're going through this process, make a list, make a spreadsheet and see what the different institutions have to say about that.
Absolutely. Just kind of going back to my own high school when I was in high school, looking at the college experience, always knowing that I was coming from Florida, looking at schools much further away from home, couldn't always fly. Was that going to impact my application negatively? And just having those conversations with the schools to know what their exact policy is on it.
Yeah, another question that we got, and it's similar to the transcript question, is there, should we be bringing our resume to the interview or anything else we should bring to the interview? Again, if it were in person, I would say, sure, bring it with you, and it is a helpful guide for the conversation. With virtual interviews, it's hard to say exactly who's on the interview schedule that day, and providing it in advance is kind of tough to coordinate. But as Liz mentioned, you can always follow up in an email to send that information along, and also know that we will see that information when you go to apply. So it's not necessary, but if it's something you want to follow up with, you can feel free to do that. In a virtual world, though, it's kind of hard to bring it with you. But that's something, as we were saying, like, don't have distractions, don't have this, don't have that. If you want to have your resume right next to you, just to kind of reflect back on, make sure there's nothing that you're missing in your conversation, I would say that's completely fine.
Absolutely.
And then, is it appropriate to ask things that you are concerned about?
I'm intrigued to know what they would be concerned about. I think so, because I think that you are trying to learn as much about the school as much as we're trying to learn about you too. So things that you are maybe nervous about going into a specific college experience, things like that, go ahead and ask. Again, knowing that it's kind of that confidential conversation too.
Yeah, I think it's fair to ask, both the good and the bad of a place. So again, if you're interviewing, you're going to want to show the institution that you feel as though it's a fit on both sides, but to kind of make sure on your end that it's going to be a good fit, it's fair to ask about the things that you're concerned about as well. And then this question's a little unrelated, but of course, happy to answer it as well. Providence College is a test optional institution, but if a student chooses to submit their SAT or ACT scores, would that give them an advantage over a student who chose not to?
Sure. My explanation for that is always that if your SAT or ACT scores complement what your high school transcript looks like, I think it's perfectly appropriate to send them in. If they contradict one another, if you are stronger in the classroom, which is what we more believe in anyway, then feel free to leave your test scores out of it. But no student is ever at an advantage or disadvantage for not sending them in. That just goes back to that test optional policy. I just always encourage students to think through, do the two complement one another before choosing to send them in or not?
Exactly. And then another question is, how soon can I schedule an interview if I'll be submitting my application in November? Is it too early in August? Is it too early now? No, it is not too early. Actually, we really suggest that you do it earlier rather than later, because in the fall, the interviews will book up very fast, and both of us and everybody on our staff gets questioned. People send emails asking, oh, can you fit one more in? And unfortunately, we can't typically, just because of availability in our schedule and things along those lines. So it's not too early. Even if you don't plan to apply even until January, you can certainly still do an interview in August. So we do have a lot of open times right now, but as I mentioned, they're going to get booked up. So take a look.
Absolutely.
Right at our
I would say wait until the webinar's over, but feel free to go ahead and do that tonight. Exactly as Jen said, take advantage now because they do start to fill up during the school year. Your schedules also start to fill up during the school year. So thinking about how you may have more flexibility and open time right now, it might be better for you to really dedicate the 30 minutes to this interview than trying to fit it in between homework and practices and different things you have going on during the fall semester of your senior year.
And then is the interview with one or several members of the Providence College community? The interviews will be one-on-one. So it will be yourself and either an admissions staff member or our graduate assistant or one of the senior admission fellows. And as we mentioned at the beginning, you only need to do it once. You don't have to do an interview with a fellow and also with a counselor, or you don't have to do an interview with Liz and then do one with me, because I know that all of my colleagues, all of our teammates are going to add really great notes. So it will be a one-on-one interview, but our entire team will get to see the conversation that you had. Is it possible to cancel interviews? And will it work against me to cancel an interview? At Providence College, it is possible to cancel an interview if maybe you tuned in today and you decided that an interview experience is not going to be the best showing for you or the best kind of a visit opportunity for yourself, then you can certainly cancel it. Again, it's important to ask every institution what their policy is. For us, we wouldn't even notice that as we go to review your application, because interviews are totally optional for us. So if you cancel one, it will not, it will not work against you in any way. Other institutions, however, will either require or strongly encourage interviews. So just pay attention to the institution itself. And then another question that came through is, would an interview be a place to explain a lower SAT or ACT score?
That's an interesting question for Providence College specifically, just because we are that test optional institution. So I would say that if a student has lower SAT or ACT scores, I would just leave them out then. I wouldn't necessarily need to have that conversation. I think especially given the nature of this year, not every student's going to have been able to take it. And we'll never know the difference if you did not submit because you didn't take the tests or you just didn't perform up to your academic ability. So I don't know, that's my personal answer, Jen. I don't know if you have a different response.
Yeah, I would agree with you, just because we're test optional. If you feel as though your test scores are not a good reflection of who you are as a person, leave them out of the process. But along that thought process, if there is maybe a grade that is a little bit lower throughout your 4 years of high school, and there is an explanation behind it, a good explanation behind it, not just that you hated the subject, yeah, I didn't like the teacher, an interview is the perfect place to take time to explain that, because otherwise we might not know that there's an explanation and we might just think you hated the class, or there was laziness involved, or wherever it might be. So definitely bring that up in an interview. But with the SAT or ACT, I would say just leave them out of the process if they're not a good reflection of the student that you are, as Liz mentioned. How do you schedule an interview? For us at Providence College, it's right there on our website under our admissions tab. There are virtual visit opportunities, and I can even send the link in the chat if you just give me a moment, so that anybody who's tuning in and wants to, like we said, kind of jump on that opportunity and sign up in advance, then you can do that through our website. Most colleges will be through their website as well.
I will even add this to my sharing of screens. You can see all of our virtual visit opportunities the same way that you registered for this webinar. You can go on and sign up for a virtual personal interview, and just add that, find the date that works for you and sign up that way.
Awesome. And if you have access to the chat, which all of our participants should have access, I did just put that link that Liz had shared on the screen. And in the bottom right, you'll see the calendar. So that's where you can find the different dates that might work for you. I believe that's all of the questions that have come through so far. I will wait just another minute to see if anybody has any other questions. All right. It doesn't look like there's any other questions, but hopefully you all found this helpful. If you have any questions really about Providence College in general, the college admissions process, test optional, interviews, anything along those lines, please reach out to our office. And the best person really to reach out to is the person who is responsible for your high school. And to know who that is, you can just go onto our admissions website, type in your high school that you attend, and our contact information, our name, our contact information, our picture, all of that will pop up. So you can certainly send us an email. Also, we encourage you to follow us on social media. We'll be posting several webinars that we have in the future coming up and different things to know about the process. Anything else? Any last minute things to add at all, Liz?
I think you covered it all. I would say just follow us on social media as well so that you get the most up-to-date info about what our office has to offer. And I hope if any of my students are in here today that they connect after. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions down the road about Providence College or interviews or anything else that we've touched upon tonight.
Awesome. All right, well, thanks again, everybody, and have a great evening. Best of luck to you with everything throughout the process.
Bye, everyone.